All right, so in the start of my JavaScript Shorts series, I want to try and keep these brief, so I'm going to talk about one topic at a time. Today I'm going to talk about closures. I think next we'll talk about anonymous functions, and then I'll talk about the difference between some older JavaScript issues and the newer ES6 syntax and some of the problems that it solves. Then we'll move on from there. But the first thing we're going to talk about today is a closure. What problem does it solve, and how do we actually use them? So let's look at the problem first. So in JavaScript, if we use the old style JavaScript and we call a variable test here and equals test, and further down here we might have hundreds of lines of codes, and we then do var test equals test2, we've now overridden this variable up here, and JavaScript doesn't complain about it. Now that is the loose control that JavaScript had, which made it very, very difficult for programmers and developers for debugging, because you might have a function somewhere that refers to this test variable and expects it to be test. But further down the line, you've redeclared it, you've called it test2, now it doesn't equal test anymore, but there's been no errors, there's been nothing logged out to tell you that you've actually made a mistake, okay? So it creates a big problem for you. However, with functions, if I went function, test, and I then down, and then further down the code, I might have some other stuff, and I forget that I've called a function test, and I create another function down here called test, I'm going to get a JavaScript error logged out to the console, and it's going to stop the execution of my JavaScript and cause some debugging issues. I've then got to try and find out, where did I use that? It might be in another file that's being loaded. Could be a separate plugin, should be anywhere. If it's loaded before this one's defined, it's going to throw an error, and then you've got to go, well, okay, so where else has test been defined? Search through your code to try and find it, and it's an absolute pain. All right, so closures solve this problem by giving you a new scope. Let's talk about scope. If I went console.log this, by default, when you put a script onto the DOM, this refers to the window object of the browser. So we're going to get window logged out to the console. All right. Now, if I create a closure, and I'll come back to what the closures are shortly. Here's my closure I create. I'll come back to this, and I put console log this. This is one of the strange things about JavaScript still. When I do that, I still get window at that point there. So it still treats the context of that straight on the script to the context inside the closure. It still treats it as window. But the difference is, if I have a function up here, test, if I've got a function called test up there, and I create a function test here, they do not clash because this is a new context. So the idea is that what seems to work if I don't call this function here and I put test, what happens is the context actually will call that function. But if I have a function in here called test, this will call that function. So it gives me a new context. So where does this get important? Let's say we've got a really simple thing like, let's say we want to get body classes. So we've got a function called get body classes, right? And in there we've got some JavaScript to get the classes of the body. Now if I then call another function down here, so let's say we've got hundreds of lines of code, this is loaded in a file for a for one job or one plugin or one feature. And then down here, I've got another script and I want to get my body classes, and I call my function get body classes. That is going to generate a JavaScript error and we're going to have some problems. So what normally people do is they put some my prefix, unique, they put something long in front of it to make sure that that name is never going to be the same as this name down here. And that is one way of doing it. You see that a lot through WordPress with PHP because it has the same issue where, so WordPress was created before PHP became object-oriented, and there's a lot of legacy stuff in there where it's just long variable names, long function names, so you don't get clashes between them. So the fix for that in JavaScript is using closures. So I can actually, I'll just take that rubbish out of there. So if I've got a closure here, and I've got a function called test inside that closure, right? And then I get another copy of that, and this could be a completely different file doing a completely different thing. And I've got that'll end up there. And I've got another bunch of code, and it's got a function called test. This is a completely enclosed function. So this test refers to that, that test refers to that. So it gives you a completely encapsulated context for naming of your variables and your functions and all that sort of stuff. It means you don't have to write really long function names and variable names to stop them from clashing with other things. You can quite confidently write very simple variable and constant and function names inside this closure, and you're not going to have clashes. So that's the reason you use closures. So that's the problem it solves. So what is a closure? Let's come back to that. So a very simple thing is a closure. It starts with a open bracket, close bracket, ends with a open bracket, close bracket, and what it is, it treats it like a function, but there's a function within that function, if that makes sense. So I can write this as the old way, function there, and pass in. So that's the old way of writing JavaScript. So I'm creating an anonymous function, which we'll cover in our next, because it's not named, but we'll cover that in our next video. And I can pass in properties here. So I can pass in, say, the document there, and I can make that document sounds better. I can pass in D, and I've just passed in D document as the D parameter, so I can log console, and that's going to log out document to the console. All right, so we can do it that way. We can also do it with an ES6 anonymous function, and that looks more like, I'll do this on a new line so it makes more sense. So ES6 anonymous function is like this. So the brackets equals greater than and our curly braces. And that is our anonymous function. Why is that looking wrong? It's because of that down there. Okay. All right, so that there is a basic ES6 anonymous function. If I want properties in there, I can add properties like D, W, whatever, and I can pass those in from this these brackets down here. I can pass those into that closure. Or if we just want a single with ES6, again, we'll go through this when we talk about ES6, I can just do a single property with no brackets, and that works just as well. So that is an ES6 anonymous function with one parameter. An ES6 anonymous function with two parameter, or one parameter can be like that as well. It could be like comma W and put comma window there. So now I've passed in document and window. So basically with ES6, if you've got more than one parameter you're passing in, you need to put the brackets. If you're passing in one, the brackets are optional. So that is the same as writing function brackets D, comma W, etc. So anyway, that is what a closure is. So I hope that makes sense, and you can use this. If you like this kind of thing, please let me know. If there's anything else you want me to cover, please let me know that as well. And remember to subscribe and like. Thank you.